Hi, my name's Matt Dew Jones, and I've been asked by the leadership of the Lunchtime Talks to be the guest speaker for today. So it's great to be with you. Until recently, I was working for the Lunchtime Talks at St Peter's Barge, but I've moved to southeast London to help start a new church called Grace Church Beckenham. If you want to find out more about that, then check out our website, or my email address is on the digital handout you'll have received. But let me pray and then read the passage as we kick off. Father, we need the work of your Spirit in our lives, that we could glimpse your Son as he is and glimpse ourselves as we are. Please would you change us, help us to marvel and be humble. In Jesus' name, amen. The passage today is Luke chapter 5, 1 to 11. Let me read it for us. This is from the ESV. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on Jesus to hear the word of God, Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw two boats by the lake. But the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets." And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signalled to their partners in the other boat to come to help them. And they came and filled both the boats, so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men." And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. I will make you fishers of men, fishers of people. This is Jesus calling his followers to share his message with others in the workplace, in their families, in this world, calling others to come to trust and serve Jesus for themselves. Now, I wonder what you hear when you hear that. Do you hear arrogance, something that breeds pride? Do you hear something that breeds despair at failure to do this? Well, whatever we feel, Jesus wants to bring humility, clarity, and joy. And to get this, to really understand this passage, we have to get the picture is fishing. A friend of mine says the story goes like this: Jesus fishes for people, Simon fishes for fish, Jesus fishes for fish, Jesus fishes for Simon, Simon fishes for people. Now, I'm sure you got that first time, but let me just run through that one more time if you didn't. Jesus is there, verse 3, and he's sitting, it's deliberate, he's sitting in a fishing boat with this crowd pressing in on him, and he is fishing for people with the word. Simon fishes for fish, so he tries to catch fish all night, but he can't. Jesus fishes for fish, and there's this miraculous catch. Jesus fishes for Simon. Simon falls on his knees before him. And then Simon's commissioned to come fish with Jesus. "Come, Simon, I'll make you a fisher of people." It's about fishing. In a minute, we'll see it's calling Christians to fish. But before we see that, we need to see Jesus has come fishing for us. Luke kind of interweaves this theme of making disciples throughout Luke and Acts, and it builds and builds. But here, at the first moment, he calls one individual to do this. He doesn't want to give him 10 top tips. He wants to make utterly certain that we get that Jesus must first come fishing for us. That whatever he might call us to, Fishing 101 starts with glimpsing Jesus, glimpsing ourselves, and glimpsing acceptance. Only then will we ever be useful, only then will we ever want to bring others to Jesus. Jesus comes fishing for us. Jesus is there, sitting in the boat, fishing for the crowd, casting out the word about his kingdom, the word of forgiveness. And Simon is there and he sees Jesus teaching, he's in the boat with him, and yet God knows Simon doesn't really see Jesus yet. And so Simon is given this glimpse of Jesus, a glimpse of him as he truly is. Verse 4, Jesus takes them out into deep water and says, "Let down your nets, Simon." "But Master, we've worked hard all night and took nothing." "But because you say so, I will let down the nets." They let the nets down, and then just that moment, they're kind of dragged halfway across the lake as this massive shoal of fish enters their nets. And can you imagine being there? The nets would be breaking, the boat would be sinking, you'd be swimming in fish and just screaming for your mates to come and help before you sink. And you're thinking, who is this in the boat? Now think about it, this isn't one of Jesus' most impressive miracles, right? He's not calmed a storm at a word or raised the dead. It's just a glimpse of his power. But even those more impressive miracles would only really just be a glimpse of who Jesus is. The letter of Colossians says, all things were made through Jesus. Thrones, powers, rulers, authorities, all things were created through Jesus and for Jesus, and in him all things hold together. Jesus is beyond our imagining, and Simon is given just the tiniest glimpse of Jesus. And yet that glimpse is enough to drive Simon to his knees, saying not just Master as he starts out with, but Lord. It's worth asking, have we ever truly glimpsed Jesus for ourselves in a way that leaves us on our knees going, Lord, here is my life. Alongside a glimpse of Jesus, Simon gets a glimpse of himself. Now, I kind of, what do you want to call it, a prosperity gospel version of this story would probably say, Jesus catches all this fish, and Simon the fisherman says, well, hey, I'm in the money. Wow, if Jesus is in the boat every time, business is going to boom. And yet that is not what happens. No, Simon says, verse 8, go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. You get a similar kind of thing in Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah gets this glimpse of the Lord. He sees God in his perfection. He hears the cherubim crying out, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. And Isaiah is floored. He says, woe to me, I'm a man of unclean lips. You see, as we glimpse Jesus' purity and authority, we can't help but see how far short we fall. As we glimpse it, we fall to our knees saying, away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful person, I'm a failure. Have we glimpsed Jesus, and have we glimpsed ourselves? Do we know what we're like? That all too often we live for ourselves, not Jesus, not others. And if we glimpsed how serious that is, it leaves us in big trouble. It's like we've fallen off the boat and we're in the water, we're drowning in sin, about to sink down into eternal punishment the Bible calls hell. And yet, here in this passage, we get a glimpse not just of Jesus, not just of ourselves, but a glimpse of acceptance. A glimpse of acceptance. You see, Jesus doesn't tell Simon he's wrong. He doesn't say, chill out, ignoring God doesn't matter, or no, you haven't done wrong. Instead, he says, verse 10, do not be afraid, Simon. Sinner, do not be afraid. Jesus has come fishing for dirty, smelly sinners like Simon, like us. He's come to forgive us, to change us, then use us in his service. From now on, you'll be catching people. Fishing's the picture in this passage, but all pictures break down eventually, I think. The problem with the picture is that fishing trips don't usually end well for the fish, right? The fish are there, they're in the place of life, they're swimming, happy, and then the fisherman feels hungry and says, come on, little fish, come and die for me, come to the place of death, my boat. But Jesus' fishing trip is the exact opposite of that. Instead, we're there in the place of death, drowning in sin and judgment. And Jesus says, I will come and I will die for you. So I can raise you up to the place of life. So the boat is more lifeboat than fishing boat, if you like. There's a little hint of that in just the way the Greek is written in the original language. The word for catch is used all the way through, but then in verse 10, when it talks about fishing for people, it adds this little word for life on the front of the word for catch. Calling people to Jesus is life catching. It's calling people to life. Have we glimpsed Jesus? Have we glimpsed acceptance as we glimpsed ourselves? I was remembering the other day about a lady I knew from the wharf called Yvonne. In lots of ways, she had it all. She had the glamour, the job, the husband, the family, but her life spiraled down into alcoholism. And sitting there in the Priory, she found a Bible. And she found the story of this sinful woman who meets Jesus and finds forgiveness. And she said, in that moment, I just knew I was that woman, and yet Jesus, there he was, holding out forgiveness. Jesus comes fishing for us. And then Jesus calls us to fish. So verse 10, from now on, Simon, you will fish for people. And again, that is the Yvonne that I knew in the wharf. Years after she'd become a Christian, there she was still beavering away, trying to help others glimpse Jesus. She always offered to walk new colleagues around the wharf to show them around out of kindness, but also out of the hope that maybe it would open a door to say something about Jesus. And there she was, bringing her non-Christian boss along to the lunchtime talks so that her boss could hear talks about Jesus, even the ones that were about sin and judgment alongside forgiveness. She'd be the kind of person who would there online, using the word one-to-one online now, trying to point people to Jesus in John's Gospel. No, Jesus calls Simon to fish, Jesus called Yvonne to fish, and Jesus is calling all Christians to fish for people. Now there's a challenge in this, we'll get to that in a moment, but actually his call is also a comfort. Jesus' call is a comfort. You see, maybe you feel discouraged by results. Simon says, Master, we've fished all night and caught nothing. When Jesus first talks to Simon in verse 2, the boats are on the water, but the fishermen have gone up from out of them. They've given up. Maybe you've prayed, you've tried hard with people for years, and you just think you're just not getting anywhere. I went actual fishing once, and I sat there for hours, and I caught absolutely nothing apart from this really tiny one that turned out to be poisonous. My friend at the other end of the boat, he did catch some really big fish. Caught like 3 big ones in 20 minutes. And I'm just thinking, what on earth is going on here? But Jesus' call is a comfort. You see, Jesus is the ultimate fisherman. Jesus is going fishing in this world, and he will be successful. Revelation 7 says he will gather in a great multitude that no one can count. From every tribe and tongue and nation and people, he will be successful. He will gather that in. And the boat, if you like, will sink under the weight of the numbers. Maybe you're thinking, Master, we've caught nothing all night. But we can say, okay, because you say so, Jesus, I will let down the net again. Hundreds of thousands of millions of people in this city, 95% of whom are drowning in sin and judgment. And we can fish for people here, confident that Jesus is at work. We can do that individually, with friends, with colleagues in the office, corporately as we launch gospel lifeboats, like lunchtime talks, like new churches, like St. Nick's on a Sunday. And here's the comforting reality. As we let down the nets, wherever we are, we just don't know what shoal God might have swimming past us at that moment. what we do know is that as the worldwide church lets down the nets, a vast multitude will be gathered in. This is exciting stuff. Jesus' call is a comfort. It is a comfort when we're discouraged about results, and Jesus' call is a comfort when we feel discouraged by ourselves. Maybe like Simon, we've glimpsed our sin. Can he really use me? We're feeling our weakness. Jesus' call is a comfort. You see, Jesus only ever calls ordinary, weak, sinful people. If you're Jesus, think about it, if you're Jesus and can control a whole shoal of fish, do you actually need any fishermen at all? No, you could just catch them yourselves, right? You could tell the fish to just kind of jump up in the boat on themselves. You don't need the fishermen. And yet, Jesus so wants us to be like him, to be caught up in God's mission to save, that he takes weak failures like us, and he includes us in the work of bringing others to see Jesus. Fishing isn't for a special minority, somehow that are better than the rest. There's no kind of superhero Avengers to assemble. It's not for the proud. It's for those who glimpse themselves as failures and yet glimpse Jesus and his acceptance and say, well, if he's on board, I reckon we might catch something here. No, Jesus' call is a comfort. And last, Jesus' call is a challenge. From now on, you will fish for people. These words, they just kind of wrench me from lethargy every time I hear them, I think. They're words for me and words for you. Christian, Jesus wants you to fish for people. Do we live like that? Not just a kind of quick prayer once a week for an unbelieving relative, but does it shape our everyday, our work, our weekends, our wallets? On my one ever fishing trip, after a couple of hours fishing, I actually just gave up. I got out a drink and I just lay back in the boat and sunbathed. And that must never describe our Christian life. We mustn't forget this drive to evangelism, this call. Our gospel lifeboats must stay lifeboats and never become cruise ships, if you like. And this passage wants us to ask, what would we give up to obey this call? Verse 11, when they had brought their boats up on land, they left everything and followed him. I have this picture in my head of getting to the New Creation and meeting Simon Peter or a missionary great like Hudson Taylor and them saying, so, how was evangelism for you? And I say, well, it was pretty tough with my friends and parents in my kids' class. I could tell I was likely to get the kind of social cold shoulder. So I kept quiet about Jesus most of the time. I didn't want my kids to get the reputation at school of having, weird parents, and this kind of, the pioneer missionary to China kind of raises this quizzical eyebrow. No, in weakness and in failure, we're to say, Jesus, here I am. You're calling me to fish. Please give me the bravery I need to help others glimpse you and find your acceptance. Not out of guilt, but because we've glimpsed him, because we know that he is at work, the comfort of knowing our Saviour accepts us. He said, do not be afraid, and he wants to use us. What a privilege. Let me pray as we close. Father, please would we glimpse Jesus and glimpse ourselves, glimpse acceptance, that we would love to talk about Jesus with others. Please would we hear the comfort of this call that you are fishing for people in this world. And please would we not ignore the challenge. In Jesus' name, amen.